Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for those authentic comments. That was just me talking to my friends behind the camera over there. We're having a Christmas party at the moment, as you can see. But I've taken time out from that to chat to you, my subscribers, about my top 5 and bottom 5 movies of 2018. This is my first time doing one of these videos and I'm actually quite excited about it. I haven't done one of them before because I don't think I've ever really consciously gone through the year thinking about that list. But this year I've had it kind of in the back of my mind all year, and I've had a note on my phone kind of ongoing about which movies I think have been best. And the interesting thing is that they've moved kind of in and out of those rankings throughout the year. Like, quite often I'll leave a film and think, yeah, that's going on the list. And then I'll come back to it maybe 2 or 3 weeks later and think, well, maybe it's going on the maybe pile instead. But I wanted to make it a formal occasion, so I've got myself some port, some cheese and biscuits, and a lovely Christmas chutney. So I'm going to snack down, and I don't like blue cheese, so there's some left for you. This is weirdly becoming like one of those ASMR videos, or those, is it mukbang videos? Just to be clear, these are films that were released in the UK in 2018, and they're not in any particular order. It's not like there's a number 1 on my list, because that would be way too hard. In fact, I actually had a couple of outliers that I've put on a kind of maybe list that I will talk about briefly afterwards, because they were films that were almost good enough to be on that list and basically had earned their place there, and then got pushed off by something else throughout the year. So the first one probably that I saw this year, because it came out really early in 2018, was Phantom Thread. This is Paul Thomas Anderson's film with Daniel Day-Lewis, an actor who's, had a really varied career, and I've not always loved all of his performances, but I was blown away by how much I love this film. The real gift that Phantom Thread has is an ability to be quiet and uncluttered when it feels like that's the appropriate thing to do. And so Anderson is constantly seeking out moments of stillness in his film, and of course contrasting that with this sort of like very formal and kind of buttoned up British mentality that's nevertheless quite manic and told in a very like aggressive and kind of like abrasive way. Every scene in the film is a banger. It's all bangers all the time, 100% bangers. But 2 scenes that stand out to me in that regard are the kind of dress showing scene where Vicky Creeps is showing off dresses to people who are attending to kind of like come and see what they look like. And that's shot with this really quick moving, fast, handheld camera. And it has this dizzying score underneath it, and she's obviously like stressed, and she's trying to manage her expectations of her partner and also of herself. And that's really a good way of talking about what's clever about the film, the way it manages its tone effectively, the way its cinematography explains that tone and the feelings of the characters in it. And it's also a really nice showcase scene for Vicky Creeps, who is just absolutely astonishing. I hope I am pronouncing her name correctly, by the way. It is Creeps and not like crepe, right? Or like Crips. Really sorry. She's phenomenal in this film, and I can't wait to see her in something else. Another sequence that really stood out for me is when Alma, Creeps' character, kind of shoos everyone else out of the house so that she can make a surprise dinner for Woodcock, for Daniel Day-Lewis' character. And he takes this as like a personal affront to himself. What the fuck is happening out there? What's going on? I live on like the busiest road in the world, it seems sometimes. Every line in that scene would have been like the most melodramatic thing ever in any other movie. And of course here it is, they're 2 characters having this big theatrical interaction with each other. But there's so much psychological depth in terms of the way that it's told, not only on screen by the actors, but in the script as well, that it just elevates itself. Film, I think, is an analytical art that requires a lot of construction and preparation, but also has really instinctual decisions as part of it. And Anderson is a very instinctual director. It seems like everything he does comes from the gut, and he makes choices that no one else would make in the same context. And so when you hear that he's making a period film about someone who makes nice dresses, it just sounds like the most twee thing in the world. It sounds like it could be a lesser Merchant Ivory or something. And yet, in his hands, it just becomes this transcendent and yet funny and terrifying film. Not only that, but the film unifies the different production arts, crafts, and departments, really, involved in the making of film to produce that final effect. So you don't get a sense that it's just Anderson who's leading it, but you have these wonderful set dressers and art directors and costume makers, of course, and the actors and the soundtrack. They come together to make something beautiful and singular, I think. That would be a way I would describe that film and also every other film on my list. They really are singular movies. What should I have first? We'll start with the cheddar, I think, because it's like lunchtime. Obviously, I'm shooting this in April because secret, all YouTubers pre-shoot all of their stuff. So this was obviously shot like somewhere in January. And spoilers for anyone who worked it out, that wasn't really a Christmas party happening behind the camera. There's actually not a Christmas party happening back there at all. I'm getting so Christmassy for July. I mean, Christmas time. So moving from The Quiet of Phantom Thread to The Quiet of A Quiet Place. I didn't want my best of list to be this really hoity-toity art house film list. I wanted to reflect really accurately the kinds of films I watch, because I do watch a lot of genre films, and to be honest, a lot of them, while I love them and I enjoy watching them, are not like great works of art. But coming away from A Quiet Place, I felt like they had told a really small human story within a genre context and with the full extent of craft available to them. A Quiet Place tells the story of a family who are continuing to live in this post-apocalyptic world where Earth is now populated with these creatures whose origins are ambiguous, whose purposes are ambiguous. All we really know about them is that they have incredible hearing, and that's how they find human prey. As a result, the family have gotten very good and are very careful about making no noise whatsoever wherever it's avoidable, and so there's almost no dialogue in the whole film. The film begins as it intends to go on with a brutal sequence. It really serves to establish not only the threat, i.e. the genre context of the story, but also the human cost that becomes the dramatic focus of the story. It's working through that grief and the responsibility that the young girl in the family feels for that grief that becomes the main crux of the human drama that the movie focuses on. As a lifelong reader of genre fiction, in particular sci-fi, I'm always a little bit galled to see that the vast majority of science fiction films that come out are commercial. And I don't mean that as this incredibly dirty word, because of course A Quiet Place is a commercial film, you know, it made a fair amount of money for its budget. Those films only seem to be made with commercial ideas in mind, and a film like A Quiet Place really shows the possibility of genre fiction to tell those wider stories. Also, on the flip side of that, I'm not very fond of this elevated genre term, which some people, usually not the filmmakers themselves, apply to work like It Follows or The Babadook and stuff like that. I think it's unfair to genre to say that it's incapable of telling these human stories. But I think it's also worth recognising that the vast majority of genre films don't tell these human stories in any sense, really. They're much more concerned with spectacle and with fulfilling audience expectation. For a superhero film, it's that there is a supervillain who the superhero will have a big punch-up with at the end of the movie. For a horror film, it's that the right amount of teenagers die in the woods or whatever. And of course, for a science fiction film, it's that we manage to go to these big planets and have these incredible vistas, or we meet a cool CGI robot or something like that. God, that's good cheese. So when a film like A Quiet Place comes along that's lovingly shot on 35mm, that's super invested in not showing you its main baddie, and in fact doesn't until the last possible point in the film really, and which is telling a human story within a really strong genre setting, you have to throw your hands up and say that that is a really sterling accomplishment of filmmaking, regardless of whether or not it's this like art housey type story. All right, I'll try the brie now. I haven't even eaten my lunch yet. This is basically lunch for me. So A Quiet Place, thank you very much. You know, the crazy thing is I love pork and cheese, but actually that chutney is a stellar chutney. This is not hashtag spawn, by the way, just to be clear. So from the quiet family drama of A Quiet Place to the quiet family drama of Summer 1993. Summer 93 is a film about which I've waxed lyrical maybe 3 times now on this channel, so people might be getting a little bored of it. But if you haven't heard of it, then I highly recommend you seek out the trailer and then try and find the film for yourself. It's a debut feature from director Carla Simone, and it concerns a little girl whose mum dies and she has to move away from Barcelona where she lives to rural Spain to live with her aunt and uncle, and her little cousin who's much younger than her. The film's pretty light on plot, a fair amount of stuff happens, but the closest thing that the movie has to an overarching theme is discovering the truth of what happened to this little girl's mum. And I don't want to spoil it for the viewer, but it's a really powerful, gut-punchy story that is tied really specifically to the chronology that's established in that title. It is, after all, the summer of 1993, and let's just say it's a slightly different world than it is now. This is another one of those films where, like Phantom Thread, all the aspects of production come together really well. It's a story that's led by a little girl. I mean, she is really young, and yet it's this incredible powerhouse performance that is both affecting and effective. All of the casting in the film is phenomenal, but my favourite thing about it is Carla Simone's direction. The film is set in this really lush green landscape, and that colour shoots through the movie. It's also boiling hot all the time. And you get this really strong sensory impression that makes the film feel very grounded. And yet, there's something about following the imagination of a child and watching children play and seeing how that works that makes the film feel almost lyrical. That, coupled with a story that's fundamentally about grief, and especially for one who's too young really to understand it, as much as any of us understand grief, makes the film feel like it has this incredibly large scope, an almost cosmic point of view, which deals fleetingly with religion and love, families, womanhood, These incredibly strong themes that are told through a really prosaic story that's very light on plot. Can't really praise this film enough. I'm very much looking forward to her next film, but I highly recommend that you seek out Summer '93 in the meantime. It might be a little hard to find. It was a very small release in the UK, but it's been a really widely reviewed movie, so you should be able to find a lot of other writing about it. And Carla Simone's short films, some of them are online, so you can give those a watch too. Summer 1993 is a wonderful film, and thank you, Carla Simone, for this beautiful artifact, this lovely piece of art that has really affected how I work as an artist, I think. It's really influenced how I look at my filmmaking practice. That's probably the highest praise I can give as a filmmaker myself to another film, to say like, this really made me think about how I approach what I do. Cheers, Carla. Another film that I adored this year that also happened to contain child actors and have a relatively plot-free story was Shoplifters by Koreeda Hirokazu. I've recently reviewed this on the channel, so instead of talking about it in depth here, you should go and see that video. But I'm just going to give you a couple of brief overviews as to why Shoplifters is probably one of the best dramas I've seen in the last decade. Not just one of the best films of 2018, but just an absolutely wonderful film in its own right. Shoplifters is, on one level, a street view story about a family who are living on the edge of poverty, are already kind of into it, and use petty crime as a way of getting by. In that sense, there's something inherently moralistic about it, and yet Koreeda just isn't interested in judging the characters in the film. For the vast majority of the runtime, his camera is on a level with them. He's always interested in just being with them and seeing what they're up to. He has a focus on the everyday activities and thinking that these characters have, that they spend their time doing. To me, that feels more authentic than some dramas which focus on very stakes-heavy stories where there's like a ticking time bomb and we've got to sort this thing out. Koreeda's films happen at the pace of life. They are just the speed at which things move. And so they have this incredibly soft quality, almost, because they are so humanistic in terms of how they approach the characters in the story. And yet every now and again he'll do something transformatively filmic that is just impossible to describe almost without seeing the film. Wow, I'm doing a bad job as a film reviewer. In one sequence, the family hears fireworks and they go through the sliding door out into the garden and look up. And suddenly Koreeda's camera is really high up looking down at them. And suddenly we have this snapshot moment of the family enjoying this time together that is almost an exterior view. It's like it's being remembered, but from the outside, like a third-person memory. I don't know if you have these, but I have some of those in my family where I remember really significant events in my life, almost like from an outside perspective, like looking in on them. Probably because I've remembered them so many times that they've almost crystallized. They've taken on this form that's separate to my experience of them. And so Koreeda, even when he retreats from viewing human experience directly, is so entwined with people's understanding that his work comes across like a memory. It's like watching a life that I haven't lived. The film's cast is completely stellar. It's the last performance from a Japanese actor who died earlier this year called Kirin Kiki. She's absolutely phenomenal as the grandma of this family, but there's also wonderful child actors, great adult actors. Even the bit parts in the movie are really well performed. And it's those kind of performances that come from actors working with a really good director that really elevate a film that's just about nothing almost, that's prosaic in terms of what it covers. I could talk about Shoplifters till cows come home, but I've already reviewed it, so I'm going to skip over it a little bit and then go to a film that I haven't talked about, and I'm going to eat another cheese cracker. Cool? Cool. This is actually just exactly like what I'm planning to do for Christmas, which is just to shout about films at my family for like 5 days while I eat cheese and drink wine. This is a great idea for a video. I'm just going to congratulate myself here. I wish I did this all the time, but I think I'd probably eat too much cheese overall then, so maybe it's for the best that I don't. Last on my list is Annihilation. This is a Netflix original film directed by Alex Garland, who made Ex Machina and also wrote the Dread film that Carl Urban was in. It's an adaptation of a book that I haven't read, so I don't know how it fares as an adaptation, but what I can say is that it is a really singular piece of science fiction filmmaking. The film stars Natalie Portman as an academic whose husband disappeared on an operation. He was like a special ops soldier. She discovers that there's this growing bubble, essentially like an alien phenomena that's growing over a section of American land. And no one really knows what it does because they can't get any signals in or out, and everyone they send in dies. Portman joins an expedition of other women led by a scientist from this facility who go through the bubble and try and find like the epicenter of it to discover what's going on there. When you describe that plot, it sounds like the kind of thing that could be a big action blockbuster, but Garland's approach is totally different. There's something Lovecraftian or Cronenbergian about the story in that it deals with these strong aspects of cosmic horror and body horror. If you're not familiar with those genres, cosmic horror is basically any horror that has a threat that's so big that it dwarfs human understanding. And H.P. Lovecraft is the most well-known one of these, with his old gods like Cthulhu and stuff like that, who don't even really threaten humanity. They don't even understand that humanity exists. Humanity's like bacteria to them. Body horror, on the other hand, is this very grounded physical horror that's about a distortion and destruction of the human body, or of the bodies of animals, I suppose. All of those types of horror are here in droves, but there's also this driving nihilism in the film, this central question of what's the point of existing? Why are we doing what we're doing? All of the characters who go on this trip are kind of like people who have nothing to lose, I suppose. But also the trip itself is essentially a last-ditch attempt. The government's been there for a couple of years, they've sent a load of people, and their reason for sending an all-women team is just simply that they've only sent men before. They really don't know if it'll make any difference at all. Now, those themes aren't things you usually see in sci-fi, and especially not with big actors in it as well. But here's this relatively glossy-looking sci-fi film that's going out on Netflix, so lots of people are seeing it. It's not just on an art house run, and it has these big-name actors in it like Oscar Isaacs and Natalie Portman. And so for me, as a sci-fi fan, it was really heartening to see such a complex story being told. I suppose in a sense that's similar to why I liked A Quiet Place so much. But the imagery in the film and the way in which it's communicated is also really singular. The bubble itself is this terrifying entity that's completely unclear, and a huge amount of the violence that's shown in the film and the distortions of animals and humans that happen within the bubble are never really explained. The film thrives on telling you very little about what's going on, and I found that incredibly refreshing. It reminds me of those classic sci-fi short stories from the 60s and 70s in anthologies like Dangerous Visions, or stories by like James Tiptree Jr., Alice Sheldon, who I've just recently been reading, where these stories really explain nothing at all except the central human drama at the heart of it. And so they come out with these really powerful messages that are unmoderated by these genre elements. As with every other film on the list, all of the aspects of production came together on this film to create something really special, but it also has that particular singular character. I don't mean unique, because I think that would be ignoring what it owes to other films and other stories, but there is something singular about the story, the way in which it's told, the way in which it comes together. And so for that reason, Annihilation is my last of the top 5 films of 2018. For me, Will Webb Esquire. Cheers. We're coming to the end of this, but I'm quickly going to talk about 2 films that didn't quite make the cut for 2 different reasons. First one of which is Hereditary. This was a wonderful horror film that came out, truly terrifying and really grueling to watch, with a really strong aesthetic and amazing performances. If you want to see more about what I thought about Hereditary, you can watch the review on this channel. The reason why I didn't put Hereditary in was twofold. Firstly, it didn't really feel like the last 10 minutes of the film really gelled with the rest of its runtime. And then also, I think the film peaks quite early. I think it peaks probably about a third of the way into the movie, with a really special sequence of filmmaking that is absolutely appalling and kind of horrible to watch, but really well crafted. So in the end, I was umming and ahhing between Hereditary and A Quiet Place, because I felt like they filled quite similar spots on the list, and just because A Quiet Place is so much more complete, I decided that was probably the better one. But Hereditary was an extremely close kind of like competitor there. And my other choice was Burning by Lee Chang-dong. This film was released in a couple of places, but not in the UK yet, so I can't put it officially on the list. I'll kind of keep stum about it until I do an official review on the channel, but it's basically this giant Hitchcockian thriller that is a really nice human drama and almost like a rom-com at parts, that then turns into something very disturbing that says a lot about South Korean society now and the way in which women are viewed there, not just in the society, but in the media created by that society as well. So Burning is definitely worth a watch when it comes out, but you can always watch my review later to find that out. That's it for this first part. Join me in my second video to see my worst films of 2018.